Hey everybody, this is Darren Van Dam and you are watching Flick Connection, the show that helps you get more out of movies, and today I want to tell you about the 20 most badass movies you can currently watch on Netflix. So this list is going to be filled with shootouts, fights, busted knuckles, and the most badass lead characters currently available on movies on Netflix. This video is sponsored by NIRVANA CBD, and I'll tell you more about their products midway through the video, but let's get started with my number 20 pick, which was kind of a, lack of a better word, a sleeper flick called Sleepless. This actually stars Jamie Foxx, and it is a remake of a superior French language film called Sleepless Night. Same concept, it's this whole sort of caper thing that takes place in this massive nightclub. In the French version, in the American version, it's a casino in Las Vegas. Very, very similar setting, but the French version is just more balls to the wall, action, almost John Wick level kind of stuff. And then Sleepless is a little bit more of a crowd pleaser movie. Now, Jamie Foxx is good in it. There's a good supporting cast with people like Scoot McNairy, and it's a good looking movie for a sort of lower budget action movie. Big enough of a budget to come out in theaters, but not big enough of a budget to really blow your hair back, which is why I've got it back here at number 20, but it is fairly well executed and doesn't have a ton of flaws other than just being somewhat mediocre, if not slightly above mediocre.
Give me the bazooka, will you?
We gotta be on our toes.
Okay, I think it's done.
Now my number 19 pick is an even lower budget movie and maybe an inferior product at the end of the day, but it is more entertaining ultimately, and that's Killing Gunther. Now this is a sort of a parody flick about hitmen. Think John Wick again, but just an absolute comedy. This is like a mockumentary format about this group of hitmen that are trying to go take out this guy named Gunther, who is like the most epic hitman to ever live. The body count for a comedy movie is pretty high as well, and it's just got funny jokes. Like I said, very, very low budget, but it delivers. It was way funnier than I thought it was going to be, and they just added it to Netflix this month. So if you haven't seen it yet and you want just a good chuckle and not necessarily a good movie, Killing Gunther is a great way to go. But do not expect to see a ton of Schwarzenegger in it. They sort of advertise it as being a Schwarzenegger movie. He's not in it much, but when he is, it's pretty great. Now, rated R Bruce Willis is by far the best Bruce Willis, and Hostage is one of the few good rated R movies that he made following sort of his heyday. He's a hostage negotiator. These teenage kids have sort of taken over this smart house, but because of the R rating, this movie's way more brutal than you would expect it to be. Now, it's not extreme where it's over the top, but you would not expect that from a movie because Bruce Willis did so many sort of, let's say, neutered PG-13 movies that just completely had their balls snipped. The Hostage does not. Ben Foster plays one of the bad guys, and he is a really bad dude in this one. This is when he was younger. I've got him featured as a bad guy in another movie further up the list, but it's surprisingly good. It kind of came out around a time when he was producing a bit of junk, and just talking about it, I feel like it's worth revisiting.
So you want revenge? I want legacy.
We're all hurt the ones who try and love us.
Now, I considered the new Netflix original movie, The Last Days of American Crime, to be made-for-TV magic. And what I mean by that is it very much looks like a made-for-TV movie. It just doesn't have the gloss and the sheen that a theatrical release movie would have had. However, it's so much more ballsy than a made-for-TV movie because Netflix doesn't care. They don't have advertisers. This is a gritty movie. There's a really graphic sex scene that takes place in a disgusting public bathroom, and that's early in the movie. And then it just continues to have this really raw edge. And it's an alternate history. It takes place as if like the crime wave of the 80s never ended, and then in the 90s they're instituting this technology that basically is a signal that hits people's brains and stops them from doing anything illegal. It's very interesting in that respect. Just be aware you are watching a made-for-TV movie that's just kind of gritty and fun and pulpy. If you're in the mood for that, then this one's definitely going to scratch that itch. Now, one that did come out in theaters that has a similar vibe to that is 24 Hours to Live, starring Ethan Hawke. This is one of those movies that they put out with one of these aging actors where they're trying to turn him into an action star. And while the movie didn't do well, and I don't think we're about to see Ethan Hawke become an action hero, I'm surprised at how much I like this one. But he is essentially given 24 hours to live. He's got a timer on his wrist, and he just goes on a rampage. It's really pretty spectacular, and it's a lot of fun. So if you clicked on this video, you want to watch something badass, you want to watch some bones break and some blood and some bullets, 24 Hours to Live is a great pick, especially because I know a lot of people missed it because it just didn't do well, but it does punch above its weight if you consider the fact that it's sort of this like already forgotten about little rinky-dink action movie. Valor now has some years on it, but back when it came out, this movie made some headlines because it was done on a fairly low budget, but it was done all with real Navy SEALs instead of actors. Something that hadn't really been done before. A lot of times they bring guys like this in to help consult with movies to make things seem more real, but in this movie, they're actually doing all of the stuff that you see. However, they're not very good actors. However, they don't have to act very much because of the script. A lot of the movie is them being on missions and then being in action, which is great because that's what you really want to see in a movie like this. When they are having discussions and stuff, it takes you a little bit out of the movie because they're not good actors. They're also not that bad either, so it kind of saves it. Just be aware that that's the type of project that you're watching. And this one's pretty cool, especially considering it was done all independently for, I believe, about $15 million, which is a decent chunk of change for an indie movie, but it's packed with special effects and action and is ultimately pretty badass. Now, Haywire is one that I didn't really like when it came out because I had high expectations for it, mainly because of who's behind it. It's Steven Soderbergh, who's most famous for the Ocean's trilogy, as well as great movies like Traffic. It also has an amazing cast with Ewan McGregor, Antonio Banderas, Michael Douglas, Channing Tatum, the list just goes on. But it's led by Gina Carano, who was a famous fighter turned actress, and this is one of her first movies, and she has to really carry this movie, and I think she was maybe not quite ready for it. However, she is a total badass in this movie, and I watched it again recently, and I sort of knew what I was getting into because I'd already seen it, and I enjoyed it a lot more. It kind of just doesn't work all together, but it's got this sort of vintage vibe. The action in it is pretty hard hitting, and when you really know that you're watching sort of this double-crossed spy espionage thing, that's a little slow at times. I really enjoy it and recommend it. However, I still respect the fact that it's kind of a misfire from Steven Soderbergh. One of Mel Gibson's latest movies, Bloodfather, features him as a total badass. Now, this is an old Mel Gibson movie, and further down this list, closer to number one, I've got an old Mel Gibson movie. But in this one, he is, number one, he's totally jacked in this one. I mean, he's huge, and he plays this sort of Hell's Angels type guy who has a daughter on the run, and he's trying to keep her safe from these cartel guys. It's rough stuff. It's got elements of movies like Taken, yet it's rated R. It's a little bit more grounded in the sense that they're just trying to get away and escape. It's not kind of overly romanticized either. And I liked that. I liked that it felt fairly grounded. And there are some explosions and there's a motorcycle chase, but it all worked together really well. I was pretty surprised by this one, especially for one that didn't get a lot of fanfare when it came out, mainly because people have chosen to forget about Mel Gibson. If you can still watch his movies, this is a pretty good one.
Boys, I know you can hear me. You are in a whole lot of trouble. What we're looking at is a felony offense. Did you open up the trunk?
Now, sort of a slow burn one that definitely pays off, especially if you're a Kevin Bacon fan, and let's just admit, most people love Bacon, is Cop Car. Now, I didn't mean to make an awful cop joke, but let's face it, I mean, the guy's name is Bacon, but he plays a dirty cop in this one, really dirty. And at the same time, a couple of young, very young kids find his car in the woods because he's up to no good, and they decide to steal it and take it for a joyride, and chaos ensues. Now, it takes a while for the climax to build, but it's well worth the wait. Plus, you get this sort of fun, interesting thing with these kids driving around this cop car, and there's weird interactions that totally work. And then just like the shit hits the fan and things just continue to get worse. And it's a great little indie flick that's just sort of hiding out on Netflix. Hidden gem type stuff. I tried to pack this list with hidden gems, and Cop Car is a great one. Now, the last one on my bottom 10 is Lawless. This is actually directed by John Hillcoat, who's most famous for movies like The Proposition and The Road. And Lawless is a little bit more of a crowd pleaser. Not totally, it's still got a raw edge to it, but it's not as niche as those other movies are. And it takes place during the Prohibition era, and it's got a great cast. It's got Tom Hardy, Jessica Chastain, Shia LaBeouf, and Guy Pearce is a really creepy bad guy. But it's about this family of moonshine runners, and they're not on the run from the law, but they're sort of going toe-to-toe with the law. And it's got a great look to it. I love that period. It works really well in the movie. It's convincing. And then it's just this great sort of drama that unfolds. It's got some good action sequences. And naturally, if you can't tell by the giant scar on his throat, Tom Hardy is an absolute badass in this movie, and Tom Hardy will come up 2 more times on this list in one movie further down the list. So for nearly a year, I have been taking CBD supplements almost every day, and I notice when I've forgotten to take it, especially if it's been a couple of days. CBD has really helped me regulate my mood without feeling like a drug, and it has done wonders for anxiety, again, without making me feel medicated. And NIRVANA CBD, I think, is a great sponsor for a couple of reasons. Number one is just that they've got a really fantastic product. I've tried a lot of different gummies, some of them good, some of them not good at all. I'm not kidding just because they're a sponsor. The NIRVANA CBD gummies are by far the best ones I've ever had. I mean, they're huge. They're really big, and they're delicious. And what CBD is, if you don't know, it is derived from hemp. It's got all the benefits of marijuana without any of the THC. I know some of you are wondering, why the hell wouldn't you want the THC? It's a great way to improve health, well-being without getting high all of the time. My knees crackle less when I take it regularly. And again, it's a lot more difficult for me to get aggravated with people, which is such an important thing to me, which is why I take them regularly. Another great thing about NIRVANA CBD is they've got a whole slew of products. They've got stuff you can drop under your tongue, which I like to use time to time. Like I said, the gummies are great. They've got lotions, they've got topical stuff, a ton of different stuff in different package and serving sizes so that you can try it out. You could buy a lot of stuff, whatever you want. But follow the link in the description, see if there's something there that you maybe want, especially if you already take CBD. But let's go ahead and move on with the rest of the list. Now, the only Western on the list, and yes, I know The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly is on Netflix right now, but I've talked about it recently. You don't need me recommending that on this list. But Hostiles is a really great movie starring Christian Bale, where he has to take this Native American sort of across the country as sort of like this peace offering thing, and he has to take him through this very treacherous area, and there are some brutal sequences in this one. Some of the movies on this list are just in good fun. They're fairly good natured, even though they're bloody and brutal. Hostiles is a downer of a movie. It's got some really rough elements to it. And as a result, it feels very, very real. And it really does a good job, I think, of depicting a time in American history when the country was becoming civilized. They could have easily just killed some of the people in this movie, and they tried their best not to, because we're trying to make the country a better place at this point in history. It's kind of an interesting way to look at this one, and I think that's ultimately what it's about. Whereas it would have been easier to just kill somebody, let's try to create a society that's better than that. But just take it from me, it's got some disturbing subject matter, and it starts off with some disturbing stuff. So if you are easily disturbed and you turn movies off for reasons like that, steer clear of this one. But if you want to watch one of the better Westerns to have come out in recent years, Hostiles is a really great way to go.
I come here for a proper shootout. What you do with that rolling pin? You gonna bake me a cake? Rich, you won't mind if I fight back, will you?
Now, I mentioned Tom Hardy will come up twice in one movie. How is that possible? Because he plays twins in Legend. He actually plays famous gangster twins in Legend, and this movie is a lot of fun. The cool thing about his performance isn't just that he plays twins. A lot of people have played two people in the past. Here, he plays two very different characters. These brothers are extremely different from each other, and they're both really fun to watch. Plus, it's this great period piece that sort of takes you up through the 60s and 70s. That element is really well executed with the music and just the production design and the cars and the clothes. All of that works together. And then you get sort of this fun, pulpy gangster flick. I love my British gangster flicks, and Legend is a little different from some of the other ones. It's not as gritty, it's a little more polished, and it's just a different way to look at this genre, and I liked it. I liked this movie quite a bit. I think Tom Hardy fans have likely already seen it, but if you haven't, and you love yourself some British gangster flicks, Legend isn't my favorite one, but it's certainly a good one. Now, I mentioned Hostiles was one of the best Westerns to have come out in recent years. End of Watch is one of the best cop movies to have come out this century. This stars Michael Pena and Jake Gyllenhaal as partners, and it's done in sort of this, I hate to use the word gritty, it's done in this style that uses GoPro cameras, so it's got sort of this raw street level style to it that I think works really well, and it did a great job of sort of showing them as family men and friends, and as being sort of family themselves, as their families are connected and intertwined, and then showed just sort of the hardships of being a cop in LA, in a rough part of LA. And then there's more. It developed into this sort of story that really climaxes and has quite a bit of action to it as well. But both of those guys did a great job. They feel very genuine, especially the scenes where you see them just sort of riding around in the car talking to each other. They feel like real people. They don't feel like those two actors that are so famous and so recognizable. They did such a good job of feeling genuine, which is why I really enjoyed this movie. Now, for that old Mel Gibson movie, The Patriot. This is a badass flick. As far as the bloody historical dramas, Mel Gibson has done quite a few, including one that I just mentioned on my Prime Video list. I'll put a link to that in the description. But The Patriot is a great one. It's pretty long. It's well over 2 hours, but it's got some amazing sequences in it. This does depict sort of early guerrilla warfare, and it's based on true stories, although the overall story here in this movie is a work of fiction. It's fun to watch that guerrilla warfare style sort of take shape during the Revolutionary War. I'm sure it happened over a much broader span of time, but this movie sort of distills it in a way that's consumable and also very entertaining. Okay, so my next pick is the movie I made this list for. When I saw they added it to Netflix, I was super excited, not because I get to watch it again. I own it, I love this movie, but because it's a hidden gem that I'm super excited to tell all of you about, and that is The Guest. This stars Dan Stevens, and the less you know about it, the better, but it's got a really cool, just capital COOL vibe. He is this very mysterious character, and it's fairly slow in the first 2/3. Again, I'm not going to tell you what's going on with this one. It unfolds very slowly. They give you little bits of information as it goes along. Luckily, his performance and Mika Monroe's performance are really good, and they carry the movie. And it's just fun to watch. The soundtrack's great. The look of the movie's great. But then the last third, the final act, things just go nuts. It's a Darren Van Dam pick that I'm super excited to tell you about, but I can't tell you much because it'll ruin it. If you love most of my recommendations, you find I'm right according to your taste most of the time, you're gonna love The Guest. Now, Avengement is one that I mentioned recently, but only once, so it's time to mention it again for people that have not found the channel yet. I love this movie. I've watched it multiple times. It's another British gangster flick, but this one stars Scott Adkins, and it is a fight movie. It's a classic fight movie. Guys coming at you one at a time. A lot of fights in this one, and it's so good to me because it's such a different story than you normally get from fight movies. It's about this guy, it's kind of an average guy that gets thrown into prison, and people are just trying to kill him. So he does have to turn himself into this hardened, rusty nail, as he puts it in the movie. He is a total badass in this movie, and I love watching it. It's brutal and kind of gross at times, but if you want to watch a badass flick, you're going to be hard-pressed to find anything more badass than Avengement on Netflix right now.
Jesus, that's what you fucking got? Dishwashing gloves? Jesus, the fuck is this?
What does it look like? It's a fucking sawn-off shotgun, okay?
Killing Them Softly is another one that I didn't fully appreciate when it first came out. This is another gangster flick, sort of. It's led off by Brad Pitt, even though he's not necessarily the main character. It's one of the last movies James Gandolfini did. Ben Mendelsohn's got a great role. Scoot McNairy's in this one as well. And Ray Liotta. Great cast in this one, but it takes place in New Orleans just a few years after Hurricane Katrina, so things are still sort of decimated. It's a weird setting to be in for a movie like this, but it works. It's got this kind of high art element to it that isn't overreaching. It works with the movie. I ultimately really love it and feel like it's one of those movies that people are going to come to appreciate more and more with time. This movie's aging very well, in my opinion, and it's very, very good, but it's not a popcorn movie and it's not a crowd pleaser. It's a pretty smart movie with sort of an ending that's going to make you think, and the way that you think about it as soon as the credits roll may not necessarily be how you think about it in the days that follow, because it is one of those movies that is likely to sort of hang out with you. This is a very thinky movie, but if that sounds like you and you like the look of it, I think you'll really enjoy it.
If I drive for you,
you give me a time and a place. I give you a 5-minute window.
Anything happens in that 5 minutes and I'm yours, no matter what. I don't sit in while you're running it down. I don't carry a gun. I drive.
A movie that I've just loved for so long is Drive. I love the soundtrack. I think Ryan Gosling's character is great in this. I own the jacket. I saw it twice in the theater. I just love everything about this movie, mainly the whole vibe of it. And then ultimately, his character is a total badass. There are some intense scenes in this one, but it all works together well. The characters are so well developed. The relationship that he has with the neighbor is so sort of rich and well developed, even though he barely speaks in this movie. I think this movie is a great example of how good of an actor Ryan Gosling is, because he's able to emote so much just with his face without necessarily speaking. It's really great stuff. It feels like a classic movie. As soon as I saw it in the theater, I knew this was going to be one that was still going to be fun and entertaining to watch in 20, 30 years after it feels very dated. And it's another movie that's aging very well. But now it's time to move on to some honorable mentions, my movie of the week, and then the top 2 on this list. Den of Thieves is kind of a great homage to Michael Mann's Heat, and it's just a good classic cops and robbers movie. It's not nearly as good as Heat, but fans of Heat should really get a kick out of Den of Thieves. Plus, Gerard Butler and Pablo Schreiber are absolute badasses in this movie. American Assassin is surprisingly badass. It seems like the type of movie that should be PG-13 and just sort of put out in theaters on a Friday to keep teenagers busy, but it is bloody, it's brutal, and it really stands out. It's got some wild, sort of far-fetched stuff that happens in it too, but it's got some good shootouts and some fight sequences that are just a total surprise. You would not expect this movie to be the type of movie that it is based on the way that it looks and the way that they sold it. And then The Foreigner is just a really great change of pace for Jackie Chan. The only reason it doesn't make the list is because I talked about it with some others and I try not to include too many repeats on lists. But any Jackie Chan fan at all, no matter what level of fan you are of his, need to watch this movie. He's getting older, and this movie just really did a great job of showcasing just how capable he really is without making the mistake of trying to make him look younger than he is. All right, now it's time for the movie of the week. The only new release movie available right now is The King of Staten Island. It's the latest movie from Judd Apatow, who's famous for movies like The 40-Year-Old Virgin and Trainwreck. However, this one is not nearly as funny as his other movies. This is a fairly serious movie about a young man whose father was a firefighter who died. The interesting thing about it is it was co-written and stars Pete Davidson, whose father died in 9/11. So it's kind of true to his life, but it's much more about his struggle. But I recommend renting from Row 8. There's a link to their site in the description. They pair well with several devices, including Roku, or you can watch it on your device or laptop. They have a love it guarantee. So if you turn any movie off within the first 30 minutes, you can rent another one on the house, and you'll get it cheaper than you will anywhere else. Right now, this movie is $1.50 off, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it's cheaper than anywhere else on Prime, iTunes, wherever. So you might as well save a few bucks by following the link in the description. Now, top 2. Now, I tried to avoid putting really well-known movies on this list, but I could not put Sin City on the list. It is the epitome of badassedness in a movie. It is just this badass nature distilled. That's what Frank Miller was doing with the graphic novels, and then Robert Rodriguez, one of my favorite directors, did a brilliant job of bringing this illustration style to life on screen. The black and white pops like nothing else, and then the characters are cartoon versions of badasses. They're way over the top, but it's just the fact that everything sort of like boiled down and sort of delivered to you in that way. I love it. I've loved this movie since it came out, and I still do. The only reason I don't watch it so often is because it's so fresh and so vivid in my mind. If you've never seen Sin City and you like my recommendations, you have to watch it. If it's been a while since you've seen it, I strongly recommend revisiting it. The Night Comes First is another one that I've talked about a lot on the channel. I love that movie. It's foreign language. It's a Netflix original movie. Same creators as Headshot, which is my #1 pick, but Headshot is so much more badass. And it's insane because The Night Comes For Us is more badass than anything I've talked about on this video so far. But Headshot, it's got some of the most brutal fights I've ever seen in a movie, and they go on for so long. And this movie has like horror movie level special effects in these fights. I mean, human beings are basically just bags of blood, and when you introduce like machetes into the mix, it's gross. But it looks almost too real in this movie. If you want to watch something brutal and totally badass, you will have to sit through subtitles, but Headshot is surprisingly good, which is why it makes this #1 spot. Let me know in the comments what you plan on watching, and help me thank the Patreon supporters. They're doing a good job of keeping the channel alive. There's a link to Patreon in the description if you'd like to become a supporter. You can also consider clicking the join button below where you can get some additional content out of this channel. But I will keep making these videos as long as you keep watching them. Thanks for checking out this badass episode, and you will see me on the next one.